Welcome to my view from the piano bench. We do this every Wednesday, yeah, evening at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends every Thursday evening. I'm still disoriented after my trip, and well, I'm disoriented anyway, so I guess it's just a permanent state of being made worse at the moment. Thank you to all of you who supported and encouraged me via the links that you'll find on the support page of my website, and you'll see a link to that in the video description. Different ways to put a drop in the tip jar, which is always appreciated. And the Patreon is set up to be a low maintenance take on that if you watch this regularly, and you will receive some exclusive content every month from me. So, speaking of content, here we go. My view from the piano bench, or in part from the audience, but just my view, whatever I can see. And the title of this, or the topic that this will be today, I don't know if I can use words yet. This is going to be interesting. The need for agreement. The need for agreement. Now, this is one of those areas, those many areas, perhaps every area, that what is learned in music is true of all of life in general. And you've heard me say this before. One book I've threatened to write over the years would be called Everything I Ever Needed to Know in Life I Learned at the Piano. Of course, as my mind is prone to do, now another potential book title has come through my head. It's not exactly that, so we'll see if anything gets written, but at least on occasion I will open my mouth, which can get me in trouble. But sticking to the topic, agreement is good. And actually, agreement is essential in any endeavor for any reason. There has to be some kind of consensus. Consensus can be forced, or consensus can be organic and deep. Consensus creates, especially when it's not forced. In fact, when it's forced, it's not this, but consensus creates actually this new place that wasn't there before the consensus. The consensus is a unique combination of forces. And in music, that is so evident and profound in my experience, and I'll bet in yours as well, as a listener or as a participant. So if you really want to take the music to that special, magical place, agreement is essential. Now, the little kind of qualification parentheses here is solo performance or solo music making, which is, I don't want to say anomalous, but it is not really what music making is about in the broader sense. But then in the broader sense, solo performance is also about agreement. It's about putting yourself in agreement with the forces around you. So really, it's all the same. But what I'm talking about really right now is the collaboration, the dynamic between musicians. And whether you are a musician or whether you watch musicians from the audience, you're aware of that dynamic. And when that dynamic is really happening, you know it's really, really, really cool. So, agreement, there it is. And there's always that opportunity when two or more collaborate on something. And I'm now having a deliberation that I did when I wrote this yesterday. Yay for me, it's not like 5 minutes before. I actually wrote it yesterday. To kind of quote a Bible verse, which, you know, it's not the point of this, but It basically, in the spiritual sense too, when two or more are in agreement, that that connects to something bigger. Let's put it like that. And so it's really, really like vital. So in music, when you combine particular musicians, you create the opportunity for a unique synchronicity every time. Because that particular combination of musicians, and if I'm going to, have hinted at, something that would suggest in broad terms religion, a quote some of you at least have heard me say this before. A friend of mine, not talking about any particular religion, but saying that two or more people can make music together is proof of the existence of God. And it's just a acknowledgement of the profundity of what happens when you collaborate. So it's a real deep, wonderful thing, and a thing that can be thwarted and go wrong and be really, really frustrating as well. And in part because of what the possibilities are that can be thwarted. But at any rate, two unique people, or more than that, specific people, unique synchronicity. But then when they come together again, or even 10 minutes later, or 20 seconds later, or next year, external forces, other things, internal and external, are different. That unique moment, because we're talking about the combination of ingredients, but we're also talking about, as always, the moment, the unique moment, and every moment is its own. So it's just all magical all the time. So thinking about unique combinations or just special combinations, and there's all kind of places I could go, duo acts, Simon and Garfunkel came to mind right away. But if I wanted to, give an example into my little universe, I think a nice example would be all of those Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong collaborations, which are all magical and special, and they were arranged, and I'm not entirely sure about the specifics of this, but it seems like it's coming out of that sort of, Norman Granz kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? He liked to combine players and do things, but whether it was Norman Granz or not, whatever was behind that Ella and Louis thing, it was still a wonderful, magical thing. It was all kind of great recordings of the two of them singing together. So that'll be my starting point as an example to give me a chance to play something. And so I just took a little look on YouTube and what did they record, and I just picked one. Of course, I could have probably picked anything, but anyway. Dream a little dream of me. Nice tune, wonderful collaborations. So we're talking about agreement, the need for agreement, and it's agreement on what you're feeling. It's agreement on a level more than we agree that 2 + 2 = 4. We agree that something is right, and that's kind of a important point of this. It's a distinction between getting it right or being correct. That's a better way to say it. Being correct, and more about consensus. And ultimately, in terms of really getting someplace or going deep, consensus is the really important thing. So I've talked about this before, and now I realize I need to open my tablet for a tune I'm going to play next that isn't really in my head like it should be, which I don't like to do, but I'm doing it. So there. Talked about the difference between how I would term it, holding hands on stage and throwing someone on your back and carrying them around. And I use that, at least in my own mind, with reference to Mainstay Mondays, that wonderful opportunity I had. And if you're unfamiliar with me or that, the Mainstay is it's very, very special performance venue in the area where I live. And from 2016 to 2020, I had the really improbable, ridiculous, and wonderful opportunity to present a concert every Monday night at the Mainstay. They were, at the time, and now have gone back to, having one concert a week, usually on a weekend, and they would be, at that point, called the headline shows. And then my shows on Monday night would feature a local musician or a regional musician, sometimes a national musician, if I could pull it off. And it would be this unique combination because that was something that, in these parts I was kind of known to do, particularly with one event that happened here annually where I was a musical director, and it was this parade of performers, and it was like, okay, this space, this space, this space, this space. Okay, so I got the opportunity then to put a show together every week. And also the opportunity, because it increased the number of mainstay shows and had a built-in accompanist, to have some of the local performers who didn't have their own bands, or weren't really, I hate to say the word professionals, but people who were musicians but wouldn't have the same opportunities, and I could give it to them, and then I'd also have people, colleagues, friends of mine, musicians I could play with or never played with before, but were great regional or even national players who would come in. So every collaboration was unique, obviously, but also unique in the sense of how much potential for that synchronicity is there. And of course, what I'm always looking for is what I would call holding hands on the stage, and that's in a sense related to the quote about two people making music together being proof of the existence of God. Because it's just like you're holding hands, not literally, of course, but in this place, and you're all reaching out, two or more, whatever, in that same spot, and that place did not exist before, and that unique energy was not there. But then what prompts that quote is, that's not happening inside of any of us. It's outside of us. It's a larger force. It's bigger than us. That's kind of the main point of that. And I knew going in that not every musician I would have with me is going to be able to do that. And I know that's wrong. It's not my default to work with somebody else and basically just decide, okay, you're going here, you're going there, come with me, or yank, and actually I've worked with band leaders who are like that, and it's really not fun. I would call them puppeteers, and what we really want is that immersive, wonderful experience. But local performers who aren't professional, who don't have a lot of experience, I'm not saying they're not good, but just not at that place yet where they've really developed that. And so it's like, okay, I'll carry you around, and I'm happy to do it. You play the role that it is there to play, so to speak. But I think the point I'm making, probably not well, but hopefully you get it, is that we always strive for that magical place, that place of hand holding and stuff. And actually I did make a side note here to make sure I mentioned agreement versus forced compliance, right? Which I've sort of said, but so it's not about like we're all doing the same thing. It's about we're all feeling the same thing. We're all immersed in the same place, right? And this would be a more difficult or nuanced discussion if I were talking about like just classical playing and pulling from the page, because I'm talking about now the being in the moment things, my world. But it still applies everywhere. But I'm talking from, my position on the bench, whereby my view, goes wherever the heck it goes. So, forced compliance may include agreement in the sense of it's the consensus, but part of that agreement is like, oh well, I'm doing this now, So I think you understand what I'm saying. So the next thing I'm going to say, a little example, and it's going to sound a little harsh, which is why I have had opportunity to comment on this before and haven't. But it involves a little trip to a jazz club not that long ago, and listening to the band. It was a core band, and later on there was going to be a sit-in that I didn't stay for uh, because of circumstances. But what I observed there was like, wait a minute, no. And that's what actually prompted this. And I figured I'm going to play one of the tunes that they played there in their set, which is one I should really kind of have in my head, and I don't. But it's a beautiful tune, and that's why I have it open here. Oh, really, really, really nice tune. So when I sat there and listened to the band, sat through an hour set. There was an issue that was immediately evident, and it kind of got my attention and pulled me a little bit into the microanalysis, because it was an obvious issue. The person I was with, who was not a musician, noticed the same issue and described it in general terms. It was an obvious issue, so it wasn't something that I was microanalyzing to find. It was blatantly there, but of course I could go into it a little deeper, and the person who I was with, zoned out after a while. It's like, okay, it isn't working. And me, I was able to stay focused on, like, okay, what in the heck's going on? And the thing that was immediately evident, and this is how I would describe it to a musician anyway, that they all had a different relationship to the pocket. But I'm talking about the pocket, not that. I'm talking about, the beat, the pulse, and that beat or that pulse is what defines everything. And when you listen to a good band, I'm not talking jazz, I'm talking about anything. You listen to a good band, R&B, soul, whatever, it's just like there's this time feel, there's this thing, there's this groove, and I can, just talking about it, I can feel it, right? And it's like, and we have four guys who had different perceptions or identifications with or approaches to what that was. Not necessarily based on ability. Ability plays a role, but attitude is like the most important role. And, so if you get something right, speaking in general, you're correct. You have four people collaborate on something who are all correct. Without that consensus place, that attitude, that connection, you have four versions of correct that may be all in conflict with each other, which seems a little paradoxical, but think about it. I don't know if I can explain it better, but hopefully you get the idea. That when you're doing something right, you're doing it within your own space. Okay, and this goes back to, and some of you heard me say this before, forgive me. I played, music ever since I was, a year and a half old, and got my first toy piano, right? And then had music lessons from the time I was 7. By then I owned every toy instrument ever imaginable, and I started playing piano. But I never really had interactions with other musicians, other than my piano teacher, who was kind of in his own solo piano bubble. He was an older gentleman, older classical player. And we would play duets together, but the idea of, like, basically agreeing on the pocket kind of thing was never there. Agreeing on time. And I could have my own conception, and parenthetically, solo pianists can have a reputation, something I have to overcome when I'm first viewed as a solo pianist, about maybe the time not entirely being there. And I don't mean everyone, but I mean just like in general as a concept, because the real disadvantage of playing piano is that you don't have to collaborate with anybody, so you don't develop that sense of collaborating in time. So when I got to high school and had trumpet as my double, because I had to be able to play something in the marching / concert band to be in the music program. That first year, 9th grade, I learned so much, because it's like, wait a minute, I have to, like, whatever my conception of this rhythm is, which could be right, it's like, I have to actually be paying attention to what's around me, and there has to be this broader agreement. on top of that, it's like I never had this, was never held to that kind of sense of time before. Never used a metronome and any of that. So man, ninth grade was like catch up time for me, and really the most perhaps important musical experience to date. Playing with other musicians. So the idea of agreement and consensus, when it's not there, it's obvious. And the word that was used, and a very appropriate word, the person I was with said to me, used the word disconnected. Now, if I said they weren't all working together, I didn't mean that they were in different places of the song or they were lost. They were just all in their own little spaces. And I could be very, very specific, about who was where and what was, what and what this one was doing. I don't really want to do that. I'm tempted to, and and these musicians wouldn't know who I was talking about and would never have heard of me anyway. And I wouldn't name them, and I don't even honestly know their names. But I'm content to just make the more general point, although I may say a few things. But there was stylistic diversity between them, which was interesting, which made it more difficult. But then when you have that stylistic diversity, you have to kind of acknowledge, okay, where's the other person and where can I meet them? And here's an example from my experience. I played a lot of duo gigs with bass players. I was in a circumstance for years where I would play duo gigs with bass players multiple times a week, and lots of different bass players. And I got to learn it was really invaluable. Different approaches that bass players have to the pocket, to the time, and none of them are wrong. It's just who they are. And some, because of my relationship to time, were more challenging to play with. I had to work a little harder to be in that same space, and probably the bass player did as well. In terms of playing like a Ray Brown thing, like man, right, or playing. And this is something that I learned from Steve Pasquarelli. We talked about a lot. Playing on the front edge of the beat, which is, without speeding up. There was one bass player in particular I remember who would play on the back edge of the beat, and without slowing down necessarily, but I would feel like it was slowing down because I wanted to be on the front, And but then you're like, okay, here's where I am, and here's where this collaboration is, and the circumstance I'm describing was a reminder that not everybody thinks that way, and everybody's just like, this is where it is. And then, in particular, the drummer and the bass player had really different conceptions of time, and not in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of making it a challenge to collaborate. There were other dynamics as well. But one of the things that was sort of amusing was the looks that one would give the other throughout that set, And then the horn player was sort of in his own space, playing correctly, playing, good licks and stuff. But it was sort of like, it wasn't inside what was going on. It was laid on top. And it would have been hard to get inside what was going on from the guys behind him. But it was pretty obvious to me that he was just a lay it on top guy anyway. And then the piano player, who was, obviously to me, trying to be the glue, and, he wasn't that kind of a piano player really, in that sense. And it was just interesting. And as I said, the circumstances didn't work out on several levels to hang around and do the sit-in thing. But I'm thinking, if I did, what would I do? Which musician would I pick to try to connect with and then try to draw everybody in? Or, and this goes back to the hold hands or throw on your back. You know, do I just go in and plow, you know, and try force compliance from me, which is not my style. It's not going to, not mean my approach. I mean, and it's not going to put me in the right space. So, yeah, it was interesting. And I just, you know, by the end of the set, I just wanted to hear a nice groove, you know, and it sort of happened on the last tune. I guess I don't want to elaborate too much, but stylistically, where the drummer was coming from was going to be like a challenge to the traditional version of the pocket. You know, very, very contemporary approach to playing, but there's a pocket sense with that too. You know, any good approach is gonna, you know, you're gonna know where the time is, you know, and not just like, you know, I'm on the first beat, second beat, but I mean the edges of the beat where it falls in, and oh, be quiet, Joe, and just play. So this was the last tune of the set for them. Uh, so I keep kind of apologizing-ish all the time for things I would have said before in other streams or in other circumstances. And I need to stop doing that because, you know, not everybody has watched everything I do. Uh, and there are like little events and little things that I remember that are always going to come up because it made such an impression on me at the time. And one such instance is when the Madiri Big Band, this is like 20, 30 years ago when big bands were working a lot still. I walk into a gig one night and there's a new bass player. And the previous one, had moved on or wasn't working out. And actually, in that circumstance, there were like some time field agreement issues. The bass player was a good player, but just like coming from a different place. And so the first thing that this new bass player, younger kid, said to me is, "My job is to make the time feel good." And I just said, "I love you." But what's implied in that is that he's part of the rhythm section. And in a rhythm section, the bass player and the drummer are working together. And they're in that same space. They're making that groove. They're establishing that pocket. It's really vital that the bass player and drummer are there. And that's, of course, in this other scenario that I was describing, part of the dysfunction dynamic. The two of them were kind of fighting each other and, not interested in trying to like get to some collaborative space. They're all doing their own thing. And so that time feel is what everything else hinges on, and so the drummer and the bass player are locked in. That's just a wonderful cushion that everything rides on. I went to the concert at the Mainstay. I was off this past weekend, Saturday night. Occasionally that happens, and I try to show up at the Mainstay to support what's going on and enjoy the music. So it was this organ trio, and the thing, organ, not three organs, but organ, Hammond or Hammond equivalent organ, and guitar and drums, right? And the organ players doing pedal bass with their feet. Sometimes they do it like I do on the piano with left hand, but ideally, you do it with your feet, and then you got your two hands to play. And the thing that was absolutely perfect was the relationship between that organ player's foot and the drummer's feet, right? And that just allowed this wonderful pocket to happen in all of the different like style variations that they did, which is really cool. It wasn't just like old school stuff. It was some funky stuff and some swinging stuff, and the grooves were just solid, and that's what you want. Now, in some circles, the emphasis is placed on getting it right before it's placed on the idea of agreement, if that makes sense. Especially like in classical music, because or like traditional reading things, because the whole point of that is to figure out exactly what it's telling you to do and then learn how to do that. So there's a certain like get it right. And of course we want to get it right, but if we get it right and we're not in some larger consensus with it, it really is not going to work well. And it's going to be just like was observed in that little band that was a core group for a later jam session. It's going to be disconnected. It's not going to be effective. So when I was some years ago, evolved for a little while in musical directing and theater, and primarily a very good community theater in my area. I put the pit bands together, and rehearsed the shows and everything. And I knew that the first time I did it, and I was kind of agreeing to the realm. I could certainly do it, but I brought my own sensibilities to it, and I did it on purpose. And one of the things that, well, there was several things that I would talk about, and you could tell that the actors in particular were hearing it for the first time, and they're like, "What? That's not what we do." But the one thing that people got on board with eventually, and I think understood what I was saying, is that sometimes, and especially if you have some like amateur people involved, and you have this music, and it's telling you the specific thing, and I'm going to learn that exactly right, and everybody's trying to do it, and then you have like 4 versions of whatever that exactly right is coming out at the same time. And now I know that in some cases this is not going to fly, but and as a general principle, this is the principle, and in many cases it will work. And it's basically pick one. Pick whatever we can all feel together. What are you doing? Okay, you guys. Oh, that feels really good. You feel that, everybody? Let's go right there. And then, but that's not what the music says. I'm like, I don't care. Yeah. And I'm talking like the difference between like a double dot on the end of a note or something real little nuanced thing. It's like, if we can all feel that same thing, and we're in that same place, and then we're all in one area. We're all like hugging each other, metaphysically, and it's wonderful. Yeah. And so that it's a sensibility that I try to bring everywhere. So the way I would summarize that is, being correct is to be in agreement. So I was really redefining a little bit what getting it right means. Getting it right means being all on the same page, and allowing that page the flexibility to be representing both what the music is supposed to represent, which means there's just, you don't have free reign, but also like what we're all feeling. Getting it right ultimately is all being in one place. That's my point. I learned a lot in the whole community theater realm, and I've talked about some of that, and I should talk more at some other time. But anyway, not for now. So maybe you're thinking, but Joe, you can't even agree with yourself. Actually, I could argue with that, but just floating in between different spaces. If I were playing with somebody else, I wouldn't be floating through spaces exactly the same way. Not to say someone else couldn't float through spaces with me, but there would be collaboration on the whole direction of the thing. So everything is in its, own. Everything is its own thing. So on one of those Mainstay Monday shows, I brought in a jazz saxophone player who I didn't know, but it was appropriate to do at the time. And we get through the first set, and we standing up there as the break begins. He just says to me, "You're really like engaging with what I do," and I'm looking at him like, "What? Duh." And he says, "Oh, I know, that's what's supposed to happen, but almost nobody does." I'm like, what? No. And when I'm talking about agreement, that is active engagement rooted in listening, right? But not engagement to control of the puppeteer, as I mentioned, but engagement to join in what's going on. So I watched a piece of an interview video recently with Gary Bartz, who's a monster contemporary influential saxophone player, and he's talking about his time with Miles Davis back in the day, and the struggles he had playing with Keith Jarrett behind him. Oh, that's interesting, because when you hear Keith talk, it's all about being in the space. It's all about not making determinations and all of that. But two things at play. One, Keith was a lot younger then, and I think we all kind of learn this as we go, and mature into the idea of really active listening, and the only comments I've actually really heard him make are in regard to his solo playing, which is what he primarily does. So after this interview, I had to kind of rethink a little bit of what he, all the Standards Trio stuff, with Gary Peacock and Jack DeJohnette that they did later, and it was definitely Keith taking the lead. But I'm going to have to assume that part of what Gary's frustration was immaturity, which was that Keith would be, as he said, very aggressive and assertive behind him, not necessarily engaging what Gary was doing, but trying to steer it, and trying to, it sounds puppeteer, it's like, and play things that, were going in an opposite direction. He was really, really frustrated. And the funny part of the story was that, because all these ridiculous Miles stories, that he eventually got frustrated and talked to Miles about it, because I guess he couldn't feel like he could talk to Keith. I don't know how that worked or didn't. And then, okay, I'll talk to Keith. And then the next gig, it got worse. Because what Miles actually said to Keith is, Keith, Gary loves what you're doing. Keep it up. Do more. What was the word? It was like divine rascal or something that I've heard somebody describe Miles. But hopefully, like you grow and mature, into that musician you're supposed to be. And of course, I certainly hope to as well. So my own evolution, which you've heard me talk about, if you heard me talk, from overplaying to getting out of the way, it's been a long journey. And I was known to be the musician who stepped on everybody, and everything when I was like a teenager and even maybe into my early 20s. And realizing that, that's a problem, and I purposed to learn how to not do that. And to a certain extent, I would do that even into my 40s and I don't want to say 50s, in my 40s. And then I got the, really, really, like, hopefully now I have the reputation of being the guy who's not going to get in your way. He's going to stay out of your space, going to support what you're doing, he's going to be there, and that's the goal. And being able to do these, I still want to call them live streams, but they're not anymore. They're pre-recorded. But the videos that we'll stream initially on YouTube and then archive, is just a continuation of, finding different ways to share the space, to collaborate, not just with musicians, but with you. Well, you're a musician too, perhaps, or you're not. You know what I'm saying? Just, I want to make that connection. So, yeah, I may look at this and say, what in the heck was I rambling about? But hopefully it made some kind of sense, and I really appreciate you being here. And remember, see you tomorrow night, perhaps, for piano for my friends. Thanks.